right, well, my surprise is ruined. Our first speaker will be joining us by Zoom. This is the data sets and analysis session, the last session at SGP. I'm Alec Jacobson, the session chair. The first talk will be given by Ziqi Li. The talk is titled RD4D, Statistical Analysis and Modeling of the Spatial Temporal Variability and Articulated 4D Shapes. So please give it away, Ziqi Li.
Good afternoon again, everyone. My name is Ziqi Li. I'm from Murdoch University. And today I will present our work, RD4D Statistical Analysis and Modeling of Spatial Temporal Variability in Articulated 4D Shapes. Okay, so let me start from the familiar cases of 3D shape statistic. Given a collection of static 3D shapes, a common goal is to compute a mean shape, estimate the mean mode of variation, and synthesize the new sample by sampling from the learned statistic models. This idea underlies many classical shape models. And in this paper, we move from static 3D shapes to articulated 4D shapes. A 4D shape is a time-parameterized sequence of 3D shapes. Given a collection of such shapes, our goal is to compute the mean deformation pattern, the mean mode of spatial temporal variation, then characterize the population using statistic analysis models, and then synthesize new articulated 4D shapes. And to perform statistic on 4D shapes, we need 3 building blocks. So first, we need a shape space where 4D shapes can be represented as points. Second, we need a metric that quantifies differences between 4D shapes, including differences in timing. And third, we need a mechanism for computing spatial temporal registration and geodesic paths. Once these pieces are available, we can compute the mean 4D shape, principal mode of variation, and generates the new 4D shape from the learned distribution. And most of the previous methods for modeling shape variability are limited to 3D shapes. Early statistical 3D shape analysis methods such as active shape model and morphable models treat shapes as landmarks or meshes in correspondence and use Euclidean tools for means and PCA. The limitation of this Euclidean setting is that it cannot handle large elastic deformations well. Later methods introduced the nonlinear metric to capture bending and stretching. But compute statistics with this metric often require approximation or nonlinear optimization. Later, SRNF addresses this by turning the nonlinear elastic comparison into L2 comparison in a linear space, which simplifies the downstream analysis. From this line of work, the field has naturally moved towards 4D shapes, not only analyzing one static shape, but analyzing how a 3D shape deforms over time. Existing work on 4D shapes has focused on reconstruction of dynamic 4D shapes or articulated skeleton trajectories. Other methods represent a 4D shape as a time-involving deformation of 3D volume, which can capture complex deformation, but it is computationally and memory intensive. And more recently, surface-based 4D analysis attempts model 4D shapes as trajectories in surface space, but they inherit limitations of underlying surface representation. One limitation of surface-based methods such as SRNF is that bending and stretching are not decoupled. For articulate bodies, large pulse changes should mostly be explained by joint motion, but surface metric can instead shrink or stretch the surface. In this example, the source and target are plausible, but the mean shape along the geodesic contains unnatural deformation. So here's a closer view of the problem. For large articulated motions, surface-based geodesic can lead to significant artifacts in the intermediate surface. And our key insight is that to use a compatible articulated parametric model to disentangle shape from the pose. So under the SMPL style representation, an articulated 3D surface is represented by pose-independent shape parameters and also the pose parameters. This allowed us to compute the shape and pose geodesic components separately in their own space. And since the geodesic is computed through the parameter space rather than directly through the surface geometry, the intermediate shape remains plausible. So with this intuition in place, so in our methods, we see a 4D shape as a trajectory in product space of shape and pose. At each time, we have a 3D articulated surface represented by shape and pose parameters, and over time, these parameters trace a curve. And such curve on the product space can be viewed as a point in the space of curves. So instead of viewing one motion simply as a sequence of frames, we view the whole motion as one element in this curve space. However, such product space is nonlinear because of the pose component, pose component. So directly evaluating a metric and optimization in this space is computationally expensive. To address that, we further map each trajectory using square root velocity function, or SRVF. So this gives a representation in SRVF space, which is a Euclidean space. The key benefit is that the L2 metric in SRVF space corresponds to the electric metric in the original space of curves, making alignment, geodesic, and statistic easier. And know that the trajectory has an SRVF representation. The first operation we need is temporal alignment. This is what makes two motion comparable when they perform action at different execution rates. So the red and the blue curves represents two 4D shape trajectories. So we define a time wrapping function xi, which reparameterizes the target trajectory. So the temporal alignments is then defined as finding the optimal time wrapping function xi star that minimizes the L2 distance between Q1 and Q2. Because of the curve matching problem is solved in the Euclidean SRVF space, we can compute the xi star significantly more efficient than on the nonlinear manifold of the trajectories. After computing the xi star, we apply it back to the original 4D shape trajectory. So the optimization is done in the SRVF space, but the result is then mapped back for visualization and analysis. The next building block is geodesic computation. In the original curve space, this would require optimization on a nonlinear manifold. But in the SRVF space, geodesic between two trajectories reduced to straight line. We compute the straight line in SRVF space and map it back to the original curve space. And with the temporal alignment and the geodesic defined, we can now move from the pairwise comparison to statistic modeling of a collection of 4D shapes. So the first statistical summary is that the mean 4D shape. So in the space of curves, the Cartan mean is a nonlinear optimization problem. After mapping the trajectories to a SRVF space, the mean estimation reduced to iterative alignments and averaging. So in this space, we initialize the mean from one input, temporarily register each input to the current mean, and update the mean by averaging the aligned SRVFs, then repeat until the changes is small. Finally, we recover the mean 4D shape by SRVF inversion. So once the mean is computed and all 4D shapes are co-registered to the mean, next question is how the motions vary around the mean. So in the original nonlinear space, modes of variation corresponds to nonlinear principal geodesic analysis. By mapping the trajectories to SRVF space, this is reduced to standard PCA. The eigenvector gives the principal direction of the variation, and the eigenvalue tells us how much variability each direction explains. And given the mean and principal model variation, we can synthesize a new SRVF Q nu by sampling coefficients along the principal directions. Then we can map the Q nu back to a 4D shape. And this gives novel articulated 4D shapes from the learned distribution. Now I will move to the results. We evaluate the framework on two main datasets, the AMASS diffuse datasets for human motion using simple X model, and the animal motion dataset for animal using small model. And we also include a synthesized manual hand sequence to show extension to articulated body parts. Because of the time frame, I will mainly show the first example in these slides. Additional animal and hand results are included in the paper and on our project page. We first evaluate temporal registration. This slide shows the pairwise setting. For two given 4D shape, we align the target to the source using our methods and to compare with the MAMM. The goal is to make corresponding motion phases comparable while preserving their target motion. So here's the result. This slide shows the results after registration. Note that MAMM is a patch-based synthesis and alignment methods. So it will match the local spatial temporal patches and blends the target frames. And this is a different design choice from ours. Our method keeps the target's original pattern and only changes the temporal spacing instead of synthesizing new cycles. And to quantitatively evaluate temporal alignments, we use a synthetic diffeomorphic wrap setting. So we take a 4D shape and apply a random temporal diffeomorphism to it, and producing a wrapped sequence that differs in execution speed. And because the random wrap is known, we can evaluate how accurately a method recovers the imposed timing. So we then apply the temporal registration to recover the original timing using our methods and MAMM. And it's clear to see that our results align better with the source. And which is also can be seen in the quantitative results. The table reports XIMAE and SRVF distance before and after alignments. Lower value means better recovery of the imposed temporal structure. Our methods obtain much lower XIMAE than MAMM on both datasets, also reduce the SRVF more strongly after alignments. This slide compares geodesic produced using DSNS and our methods. Both methods can align the motions, but intermediate shapes produced by DSNS can have unnatural shrinkage. So there's a zoomed view, makes the artifacts more clear. So DSNS shows unnatural shrinkage in the arm region, which is the motions contains large articulated pulse difference. And after pairwise registration and geodesic, we now move to population statistics. Here we compare cool registration and the resulting mean using 4D Atlas and our methods. In this results, 4D Atlas gives a less consistent mean, while our methods produce a more plausible mean 4D shape. And these slides give a closer view of the mean comparison. So 4D Atlas shows visible unnatural shrinkage in the arm region here. And once the mean is computed and the motions are co-registered, we compute the principal mode of variation using PCA. So this slide shows the samples from negative to positive standard deviation along the first principal mode, with the mean in the center, and move along the mode changes. The mode changes the 4D shape according to the strongest variation captured in the action-specific model. And this slide shows the second principal mode of variation. Together, these modes provide a compact description of how motion vary across the subjects. And the final use of the statistical model is the synthesis. Using the learned model, we synthesize normal 4D shape by sampling along the principal mode of variation. Here's some example of the new 4D shapes. This table compares the computation time for temporal alignments, geodesic computation, and synthesis. DSNS runs on a GPU, while MAMM and our methods run on a CPU. Under these settings, our method is faster at runtime and runs fully on CPU. And our method is also training free. And before concluding, I want to be explicit about the scope and limitation of our methods. So our framework assumes that the sequences within an analysis group share a compatible articulated parametric model. It is therefore tailored to the articulated shapes such as the SMPL family or small scale models, which are commonly used in the field. And it does not build a common skeleton for arbitrary free-form dynamic geometry. And the metric currently uses a fixed width for shape, rotation, and translation. And applications where absolute speed or Hall speed changes across phases is part of the signal, so it may require extra constraint. Finally, the Carter mean can converge to a local optimum in difficult cases, such as per-initialization or motions with large pulse differences. And to conclude, we introduce a framework for statistic modeling and analysis of articulated 4D shapes. And by representing 4D shapes as trajectories in the product space of shape and pulse, we develop tools for temporal alignments, geodesic computation, PCA-based statistic modeling, and synthesis. The experiments show accurate alignments, plausible geodesics, compact models, and efficient on CPU time. And this work is supported by the Australian Research Council. I'm also supported by the scholarship from Murdoch University. We also thank the author who shared their code and dataset. The QR code links to additional results and source code. Thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions if you have. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ziqi Li. We have a setup here so that Ziqi can hear and I think also see you ask the question, but we will ask that you talk into the microphone. That way he can hear it. Does anyone have any questions? I'll start with one while people think of their questions or gain confidence to ask them. Ziqi, I wondered how well aligned do the inputs have to be for the mean to be meaningful? For example, if one of the motions is raising the left hand and the other motion is raising the right hand, would that give a meaningful mean?
Yeah, that's the thing. That's if we have, for example, during the analysis, if two motion in the same time index, but the subject is doing completed completed opposite motion, this will just give us a averaging motion. So instead of giving any meaningful like analysis results, it will just be some like a uh, static neural shape instead of giving like raise the hand the meaningful motion. So I would say uh it has to be like the faces, the basic faces, it has to be the same. Otherwise, it will just give us like the average results instead of the meaningful results. Yes.
Great, thank you. Other questions from the audience? I have a follow-up question if no one
Yep.
else has
Yep.
other questions. What do you think in the future, if you wanted to expand this to handle maybe larger data sets to build
Yep.
statistics off of, or more complicated motions or less consistent motions, if the goal was to do sampling, would it be better to move to something like a diffusion model or something that just worries about generating proportional samples without trying to categorize the distribution
Yeah.
analytically?
Yeah, a good question. The one of the advantage is that we instead of like option the trajectories, option the shapes in the nonlinear shape space, we map those 4D shapes to the Euclidean space, which will speed up make the computation more efficient. So that's one reason why we show just using the PCA here is because it's just a very standard like linear operations on the Euclidean space, right? So yes, that's a very good idea. If we can even we further expand the framework, expand the framework to like you said, like diffusion models, it will still give this advantage like computationally efficient. Yeah, that's a very good idea to think about it. But this framework gives just like the basic framework how this how to handle the 4D shapes using the SRVF space. Yes.
Great, thank you. Any final question from the audience? If not, let's thank our speaker one more time.